webinar, today's presentation, What You Need to Know About Agile Requirements. Our presenter today is Daniel Morris. He's a member of our professional services team. Daniel manages all of the customer training modules for Polarion Software products. Daniel has helped over hundreds of customers implement Polarion's ALM tools to improve their organizational processes. Daniel holds a degree in computer science from the University of Applied Science in Germany. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to everyone, depending on the country you're living in. Today's topic is working agile, building bridges without losing information. About the agenda today, I will first start explaining a little bit who is Polarion Software. For those of you who already know Polarion Software, I'm sorry, but there might be some people who don't know Polarion, so I will make it quick and give a quick introduction. After that, we will have a look what Agile Hybrid means and what we think what is Agile Hybrid. Of course, I will explain a little bit the V model and some sort of Agile, and we will have a deeper look into Scrum as an example for Agile. And we will also check if we find any real-life scenario for Agile Hybrid, if it's already used in some real-life scenarios. And of course, we will have a look if Polarion can support these Agile Hybrid scenarios. So if we start, who is Polarion Software or what is Polarion Software? Polarion Software is an application lifecycle management system, which means the whole product lifecycle, let's say requirement management or test management, task management, defect tracking, everything can be done in Polarion's ALM solution. But we also have some smaller solutions like Polarion Requirements or Polarion QA, which are just a subset of the functionality. And of course, if you have teams with some sort of requirement management, so testers, defect managers, everything, they can be put together via the different licenses so they can all work in one environment. We also have this Polarion Reviewer, which is a really small license, which is comparable to, for example, Acrobat Reader, where you can just review all some sort of specifications and can give your comments and have some sort of collaboration tool. There's also a solution for a cloud, Polarion Cloud, so you can have your whole environment in a cloud. Polarion itself is now more than 9 years in business, and we are well known in the industry. So as you can see, more than 250 of the Fortune 1000s use solutions of Polarion Software. And we have brought a lot of members in our community, which help us, for example, to extend Polarion. So Polarion itself, more than 1 million users are using solutions of Polarion. So Polarion is also supporting the open source community, and because of that, they are also using some open source products which were developed by Polarion. Polarion itself has a strong global presence, so you can find us, for example, as you can see on the World Cup, in the US, you can find us in Europe, in Asia, and we work with a lot of partners who support us also in different countries. Polarion itself isn't really specialized on a special kind of industry. You can find us in aerospace industries, in medical industries, defense systems, manufacturing systems, and so on. So Polarion is really configurable, and we do, like you see in the middle of the wheel, we do requirement management, test management, change management, and so on. But because of Polarion's flexibility, all these kind of industries can use Polarion and configure their process and their methodology. Here are some examples about customers of Polarion who use solutions of Polarion, and as you can see, it's not a special kind of industry, it's completely mixed up. So why are Polarion products different? Polarion itself is a client service system, so you don't need to install anything on your machine. You can just use your browser, for example, Chrome, Firefox, or Internet Explorer. These are the three main browsers which are supported for Polarion, and you don't need to install anything else on your client machine. If the server is installed, everything is fine, and you can, for example, access your Polarion server from home. You don't need to install any extension or something like this, just need a basic browser, and you can access Polarion by logging into your system. We also support integrations in the typical IDEs like Eclipse or Visual Studio, so all your developers can also access Polarion and can stay in their UI, so they don't need to switch all the time between their, for example, Eclipse and their browser. They can see all their open tasks, requirements, defects, and so on inside of their IDE, which makes it much easier for them to work with Polarion. Of course, we also support or have a connection between Office tools. So if you have, for example, a requirement specification and you want to send it to someone who needs to review it or approve the specification, there's an integration into Office, so it can be sent via Word or Excel. But we will see this later on. Then Polarion offers an extension portal which is some sort of, well, I can compare it to an app store, where you have different extensions, integrations, which can be downloaded from our extension portal, so you can extend the functionality of Polarion. You could find, for example, some project templates, some example wiki pages, and some of them are from us, and some of them are delivered by some customers of us. They thought, well, this might be a nice extension. I will send it to Polarion and give it to the community. And, of course, we have a live bus, which gives Polarion the option to integrate into different tools. So that you say, for example, if I do requirement management in a different tool and I want to do Polarion test management, I can connect the requirement management tool to Polarion. Or if you do defect tracking in another tool, you can connect this defect tracking tool to Polarion via the live bus. Polarion itself is really flexible and delivers a web service and an open API. So it's really easy to connect Polarion to different tools. And via these web services, you can exchange some data. For example, create some tasks outside of Polarion if you have the login. These web services are, for example, used by lots of partners of us who connect to Polarion, for example, for test automation. This open API is really powerful and can be used in Polarion wiki pages, and it's not a customer API, it's the API we use by ourselves to develop Polarion. So everything we can do, you can also do in Polarion. A really important thing about Polarion, where Polarion is really different than other tools, is this option below, this repositories. We don't save or store all our data in an database. We store it in a Subversion repository, which makes it much easier for us to see who has changed what and when, and all kind of information about traceability is already in there. So now if we start, our topic today is hybrid agile. What is hybrid agile? What do I think is hybrid agile? As we can see, we've got a V model in here, and let's say on top we do the requirement analysis and a high-level design, for example, in a traditional way, where you exchange some sort of documents. But after a while, these requirements get so granular that you don't want to work, or you won't work in documents anymore. You want to work agile. So you get deeper down to the V model, and you have small packages. So if we talk about the V model, it is a representation of system development lifecycle. On the left side of the V, we see a decomposition of our requirements. So they get more granular the deeper you go. And on the right side of the V, we see the integration of the parts. So we see the validation, all the systems, the testing of the system. For example, on top left, we get a requirement analysis. At the end, we need to do the testing of this system also. And special at the V model is that each phase must be finished before the next phase begins. So it's really, you have to go down to the V on the left and then go up to do all the testing. Because of that, the model of the V model is, for example, it's a model for verification and validation. Testing of the product is always planned in parallel with the corresponding phase you're in the development. If we go deeper down into agile software development, it is a software development method based on iterative and incremental development. So you've got smaller working packages which are put into a planning phase, and a minimal planning is not a long-term planning, it is just a shorter planning. We will see more about agile in a moment. Some examples for agile methodologies are continuous integration, extreme programming, Kanban, and Scrum, for example. Well, why do some need to work Agile and Compliant? Sometimes you have to comply with regulations like ISO 26262, FDA 21, and IEC 62304, for example. And because of that, you have these compliance points. Or you must meet standards like CMMI, SPICE, and so on. Today, we won't focus on these points that much. We do have different webinars specialized about these topics, for example. But the question is it really possible to achieve these kind of regulations and still work in an agile way? And well, with Polarion, we think the answer is definitely yes. And let's check why regulations, or what are regulations. Regulations are limits or constrain a right to do something. These kind of regulations can take many forms. Could be, for example, restrictions by the government, or it can be some contractual commitments to a customer or to different business units in your company. You might have regulations about an industry. If you're, for example, in the automotive industry, you have some specialized regulations and some requirements you need to fulfill, like some norms, for example, this ISO 26262. Well, the question is, why are specifications in general needed? Why can't we just start with an agile way? Well, some of these regulations ask, for example, for specifications. They need requirement specifications, and these specifications are used as some sort of contract. So in Germany, we always have this two kind of specifications called Lastenheft and Pflichtenheft. And in this Pflichtenheft, it's some sort of contract between the company and the customer. So everything which is described in this document needs to be implemented at the end. So these specifications should be in a readable form for a human. So a customer, for example, doesn't want to have a list of all requirements. It needs to be in a specification where you might have some images, some diagrams, and of course a requirement. So not everything inside of this specification is a requirement. There could be also some free text which describes the context of the whole product. So it describes it much better. And of course, these customers expect to exchange these kind of specifications because they don't want these lists of requirements. They want to have a specification where they can check and review if everything is fine. And last but not least, but of course really important, requirement engineers. They like to work in their well-known environment. They know Word and they want to specify like in Word. Our hybrid agile data model for today is, in this example, we start with requirements and we have some test case. So there's our V model. And these are some compliance artifacts. And based on these requirements, we create user stories, which are more granular than these requirements, where we describe what needs to be implemented by our development team. And of course, for these user stories, we also have test cases. Maybe because of the testing, we might also have some defects which are linked to these test cases. So we've got a nice impact analysis at the end that we see, okay, what happens if someone is changing the requirement? We need to change the user story as well, or if we change something about the user story, that the testers have some sort of notification and they know, okay, we need to change our test case because the user story has changed. And we also have an on-demand traceability that we always know, okay, this user story belongs to this requirement, and because of this requirement, we have specified the user story like this. Here is an example of or something Ken Schwaber, one of the founders of Scrum, said, a statement. Well, the CFO asked him, what do you do? What is Scrum? And he told him, well, I help people to build software in 30 days. And yeah, the CFO said, well, you mean I don't have to wait 15 months to get what I don't want? And well, his answer is really funny. He said, that's correct. He will give him something he doesn't want in 30 days. So it's a much quicker iteration, and you can see the results of your implementation much quicker if you use Scrum, because you deliver or implement some prototypes. If we have a deeper look into Scrum, there are some typical roles in Scrum. First role, for example, is a product owner, which is, well, I think it's similar to a product manager. He's responsible for everything which will be in the product at the end. He needs to represent the interest of the stakeholders, so everything a customer is asking for, the product owner or the product manager needs to decide, will it be in the product at the end? Then we have the Scrum Master. He's the person who's responsible to implement these small iterations. He makes sure that everything what should be in the product will be implemented, but in a shorter amount of time, so they will have much more smaller packages. And of course, we have the development team, which is a group who is responsible to implement the things the Scrum Master decides which should be implemented in an increment of the product. So the iterations are called sprints, which are normally a time period, let's say from 1 to 4 weeks. Most of the time I see that development teams use 2 weeks as the optimum, so you can decide how long a sprint should be. And in this time, they are going to develop a special part of all the requirements or all the user stories from the backlog. Example meetings during these iterations are, for example, the daily Scrum. So communication is really important during a Scrum process. So every day during the sprint, the product team has a meeting where they communicate what has happened yesterday, what will be implemented today, did we find any bugs or something like this. And of course, at the start of each sprint, we do have a sprint planning meeting where the Scrum Master decides what will be implemented during the sprint cycle. At the end of each sprint, so after 1 or 4 weeks or 2 weeks, there is a review, an assessment meeting where you review the work which has been done, maybe what hasn't been finished in the sprint, where did some defects occur. So as I said, communication is really important, so there are lots of meetings during a sprint. If we talk about some artifacts, I think I've already mentioned the product backlog, which is a list of requirements, or in this case, user stories, which is ordered, for example, by priority. So if the product manager decides that something is really important and it gets a higher priority, it will be ordered in this list of the product backlog. So at the next step for the sprint backlog, the Scrum Master can decide what needs to be done during the next sprint. So the sprint backlog is also an ordered list, but it only displays, for example, the user stories which needs to be developed during the sprint by the development team. And there is the sprint board, for example, which shows you the remaining work of the sprint. So in which state are we currently? Are all of the user stories already finished, or are maybe some of them still in progress? So you get a nice overview what's the status of the current sprint, and it will be updated every day. So let's check for a real-life scenario because, well, for example, when my wife will ask me, what is hybrid agile? Or a lot of people are also asking me, for example, what is Polarion? It's always difficult for me to explain what is Polarion or explain to my wife what is hybrid agile. So I need to think about a story which she might know. And so I decided to explain hybrid agile in this way, that there is an owner of a restaurant and he wants to open a restaurant for Weight Watchers, for example, Weight Watchers restaurant. Because of that, he needs to fulfill some regulations about in the restaurant, that there are the menu, that the points are calculated correctly, the size of the portions, and so on. And these will be added on the menu card. So he really has to fulfill these regulations. Otherwise, it won't be officially a Weight Watchers restaurant. So the owner of the restaurant will give his menu card to his chef. He needs to cook these menu afterwards. And he gets the menu card with all the points and the portion sizes. And at the end, the chef has some kitchen help, guys who will help him to do some things during his cooking. So the kitchen help, what they will do, they will take, for example, vegetables, cut them into dices, slices, and whatever, check the portion size, and they will do only the work they are asked to do. So the chef needs to have these ingredients to cook the soup, for example, or some salad, and of course, these guys, the kitchen help, do need to check if the portion size really fits and if it's sliced correctly and so on. So at the end, the chef takes the vegetables, the meat, and so on to create some soups, salads, and other kind of meals. He used the prepared food of his kitchen help, and he also needs to check before he gives it to the customers, which are people who are sitting in the restaurant and want to take some food, if the meal really tastes good. Because if it doesn't taste good, he needs to cook it again. So at the end, the restaurant owner has some meals which will be tested by customers, and they also give feedback. So there's also some sort of testing inside. So if another customer orders the same meal, it will be another time be cooked. So there are more iterations. So what has this to do with Scrum, you might ask? The chef or the owner of the restaurant has some regulations. He's the product owner and also the requirement engineer, because he's going to specify, because of the Weight Watcher rules, which meals will be in the restaurant will be taken. So what will be on the menu card? So this is the product backlog, for example, the menu card, and which will be decided what kind of menus will be in this restaurant. He gets feedback about the meals and might change the menu afterwards. Also, restaurant reviewer will give him feedback about the menu, and maybe some people of Weight Watchers might also review if this restaurant is really a restaurant for Weight Watchers. Here's our Scrum Master. He gets the orders of the customer, so he has got some sort of, for example, a sprint planning, because he knows and he decides and tells the kitchen what needs to be cooked. So the sprint, I guess it won't take 7 days. It will be only minutes till the meal is finished. But he will get the orders of the customers, and he will assign small working packages to his kitchen help. So he will tell them, okay, you cut the tomatoes, you cut the peppers, and of course he will always ask for some updates. Okay, are we already finished? Can I deliver the soup, the salad, the steak, or whatever? And of course he will review the results of the food which was cooked. So there's also an assessment meeting at the end that he will get all the ingredients, put it together, and cook a soup out of it. These guys are our development team. They will do the work they were assigned to do. So during the Scrum meeting, they will get some notifications. So when the order is coming, they will know, okay, I need to cut the tomatoes, I need to cut the onions, and so on. They will be the guys who will be asked for updates. So they will be also in the daily Scrum meeting. And we'll tell them, okay, I'm nearly finished. We can go on with the next order. And of course, at the end, they will demonstrate which sort of food was prepared. So they are also participants of this assessment meeting. So what we can see, this Agile process means we have a product backlog on the left where we say, okay, this is our menu card. Everything which is in our product backlog will be on the menu that can be cooked and someone can order it. We have our sprint backlog, which would be a single order. Let's say we want 2 soups, a steak, and a salad, and this will be cooked during the sprint, which won't be 7 to 28 days. It will be much less. And of course, we have our daily Scrum where we will ask, okay, is everything already finished? After we are finished, we can give our food, our meal, back to the waiters, and they can deliver it to the customers. There's now, for an example, of course, Agile is always is used in software development. Just as an example, how I would explain it to my wife. So this could be an example for a real-life product backlog. We have a lot of documents and work instructions, and they aren't really traceable. So it's really hard to trace if you make some changes, of course, but it might be better to do this via computer. And of course, it's also different or complicated to work in different locations, because if you have this kind of product backlog, you need to go into this room and check for the specifications. Like I said, this product backlog is, for example, these can be our menu cards and receipts about our meals. Here's an example picture of a sprint backlog. So as you can see or might imagine, it's a lot of manual work to take all these user stories which are in this sprint backlog and put them into the next workflow phase. And it's another time, it's really difficult to work with different locations because it's a lot of manual work if you have a sprint backlog like this. As I've explained, these are could be, for example, some small work packages for our kitchen help, and they can give back the status if they are already in progress or if it's already finished. We will see this on our next slide. That's an example task board, which is, for example, used during these sprints. And at the beginning, it's empty without any process steps, which could be, in our case, we don't have any order yet. So here they are on the next step. There are some orders. They order some meals. So let's say this PBI 1 is a steak, PBI 2 is a salad, PBI 3 is a soup. So during our sprint meeting, so our order is our sprint meeting, we get these menus and we need to cook them, I as a chef. So what you do is you take your first user stories, if you start with them, put them on in progress, so everyone knows, okay, this one is already in progress. And so you will pick all your user stories, say, okay, if they are finished, you set them to done. And what we can see right now on this task board, our steak, this PBI1, is nearly finished. So during these daily scrums, the status, for example, about our meals are checked. So we will see, okay, the steak is nearly finished, but the other orders aren't finished yet. And if this order was from one specific table, we need to finish all the others as well. So we get a really nice overview. We always know, okay, we are nearly finished now. Everything is finished, and the service should be called. That they should take the order and bring it to the table. After that, everything is finished. The waiters can bring it to their table. And of course, this is now only an example for one order, one cook, and so on. Of course, you can have multiple Scrum teams, that you have multiple task boards, multiple sprints, and that they take everything out of the product backlog, and different development teams. Now, if we go back from the kitchen exercise, these development teams have different task boards and see what they have to do. So this now for last is an example of a burn down chart where you see the progress and it will be tracked. And of course, but this will be tracked manually. I guess this kind of chart won't be part of our kitchen example. I don't expect the chef to create a chart to see the progress of the orders. So you might ask how Polarion can help. Well, I had this, it's really complicated to work at different locations without a tool. And if you have these kind of regulations, for example, it's much easier to have a tool which helps you to track all your changes. So these changes really need to be traceable so that at the end you can always tell someone, why did I change something and what did I change? What's the impact of my changes? As I've said, in an agile way at least, or I think everywhere, communication is one of the biggest issues. And this communication between different teams needs to be a solution to help you to communicate between these different teams. Of course, you also want to have automatic reports about the status of your current sprint. You don't want to check all the time your sprint board and have to put your user story manually to the next step. It should be done most of the time automatically, that you can have it really easily without going into a different room. And of course, if you develop software, everything needs to be tracked. So everything you will do at the end, if someone is asking, what did you change about the source code? Did you fulfill the requirements? Did you test all these requirements? You need something for this. So for example, we have our Polarion Live Doc, which will help you for the upper side of the V. If you remember, on top of our V model, we used specifications. We want to specify something really easily, like in Word. And with Polarion Live Doc, you have these kind of specifications. You have your requirements, test specifications, maybe specifications from user stories as well. And you can track if these requirements, all of them, are covered, for example, by test cases. There's also coverage analysis in Polarion that you see to get, for example, a nice overview if all requirements are covered by test cases or if all requirements have some user stories, and these user stories have some tasks, so this will be implemented. Then there's an example of a Polarion product backlog, but we will see this in a minute live in our tools, so I will also go into Polarion and show you some of these examples and how a process can be done, for example, in Polarion. So this is a list of all our whole product backlog, what should be implemented. Of course, there's also sprint backlog where you have some, for example, a progress bar. So when will we be finished with the sprint? How much user stories are planned for a specific version? And of course, here's our backlog of all the user stories which are planned for a specific version. In this case, it's version 1.0. This is an example of the sprint board, and it looks like the task board we have seen in this PowerPoint presentation. You see all your process steps that you have to do in progress, done, and maybe verified, so if it's already tested. So in the sprint boards, you see all the user stories which are set to this sprint backlog, and below there you might have some tasks or defects which belong to the user stories. And the goal of the Scrum Master is, of course, to get all these tasks and all these defects to the right side so that the sprint would be successful at the end. But sometimes during software development, there might be, of course, some new defects which will be added at the bottom of this user story, so they will start in to do. So sometimes you might have a successful sprint. Sometimes there might be still some open work which needs to be done in the next steps, but that will be added then to the next sprint. Last but not least, about traceability, we always need to know, okay, we want to have an impact analysis. What happens if someone is changing a requirement? What happens to the user stories? Do I need to change my user story? Maybe if I change my user story, do I need to change my test case as well? And you can also, for example, link your source code also in there. So you've got a full traceability from, let's say in this case, a business case down to source code. So you always know the impact of changes. And of course, if you look up, you've got this on-demand traceability. So you know, okay, I've written this user story because of this requirement, and this requirement was specified because of this business case. So before we get to the question part, let's have a quick look into Polarion and how Polarion works and what can be done in Polarion. For this, I switch into my browser. I use Chrome now in this case. It's now locally on my machine. At the right, we see, for example, a wiki page which can guide you through a process of the whole scenarios. And for us now, it's important to go into a specification because we want to start on top of the V model. So if we decide to take this functional requirement specification, we have a specification with a table of content, with some text, some headers, some images and diagrams, and with requirements. And of course, you can really easily add new requirements just by pressing enter. That we say we need a more granular requirement for a user story. And this is working like a bullet point list. So it's really easy to specify in Polarion. You just press enter and you get into your next requirement to specify. So for a requirement engineer, it's really easy. And of course, it's easy to work together on the specification because this is online, accessible via the URL. So a lot of people or more than one person can work on the specification and work together. If I press enter again, I will jump back into free text mode. And of course, I can add images. I can add, for example, a use case diagram to say, okay, this should be implemented using some specific points of software and so on. So it's really nice to add some use cases into your specification. After I save, I get a unique ID, which is also really important because if you talk to a colleague about some changes, it's always really useful to have a unique ID and tell them, okay, I've got this ID 77, please check it. Of course, you can export this via Word or Excel, that you export it, make some review comments or make some approvals, but this can be also done online in Polarion, that you go, for example, in this comments panel and you can add some review comments in there and say, okay, this should be, let's say this should be specified a little bit better. Or you go and you see everything is tracked that the system administrator has done this at this time and this date. And that's also because of our Subversion repository, which tracks all the changes which were made during the process. We also have this approvals panel where we can go through an approvals and say, okay, we approve or disapprove some work items. And of course, if we disapprove some work items, we should add a comment why we have disapproved this work item. But we don't make an approval right now, so I cancel this operation. And we will see the connection to our Agile part. So let's say we've specified our, let's make a save. Okay, I need to add it for an electronic signature. So let's save this specification. We also have some coverage analysis, but I will come to this on the Agile part later, that you see that every requirement has been covered, for example, by test cases, or all user stories are covering some requirements. If now the development wants to implement, let's say, this requirement, you can open this item and can create directly a linked work item, a linked user story to this requirement. It doesn't need to be in the same project. In this case, now I decided, okay, maybe the development team isn't working in our hybrid requirements project. They are working in their own Polarion project, in this eLibrary project. So I click on this, and as you can see, it's now this user story will be created in the eLibrary project. So I've got an test user story for my, I think it was a functional requirement. We click on create, and we have created a new user story into eLibrary. So if we jump into eLibrary and check, we will see that we find this test user story for our functional requirement. And of course, we will see, okay, it is linked to a requirement in a different project. So the nice thing about this is the requirement engineers, which are working more in a traditional way, have their own project where they have their own process steps, what needs to be fulfilled, in which step I need different kind of analyzers that you see, okay, depending on that, I see a V model board on these wiki pages. I have a special workflow for my requirements, and I see the coverage of all my, for example, in this case, the test coverage or requirement coverage. And our development team will have their own project where they have their own coverage analyzers. So, for example, this test case traceability, where they see if all user stories, for example, are covered by test cases, and if these test cases have defects. Of course, this traceability is just a wiki page, and this can be changed. So, for example, if you need a more detailed traceability table with more levels, for example, to see all the requirements which are belong to this user stories, this is possible. If we go into this release page, we can see everything which is planned for this specific release. So if we take, for example, our user story we created and assign this one to target release version 1, we should see this user story in our release page, in our backlog. So as we can see, here is our test user story for my functional requirement. So the development team has their own wiki page where they can see the progress and see what needs to be planned during the backlog. I don't want to assign this one now to a specific sprint because it has not yet been approved, verified, and accepted. But we can also check the sprint board to see some example data. And we will see there are user stories which are all out of this release backlog. And below these user stories are some tasks. So, for example, to implement this functionality, search for a book by advanced properties. So if I open the task and I say, okay, I want to start with it, I set it to in progress, which would be similar to, if you remember the picture, to go into the room, take the post-it and put it to the next phase to set it in progress. So I set it in progress, refresh my sprint board, and what we should see is that the task is wandering to the right side. So it's now set in progress. So it's always there is a workflow state for each work item. And if you change the workflow state, so every user can work on their own work items. And if they say, okay, I'm in progress, this sprint board is automatically updated. So the Scrum Master at the end always knows the status of his sprint. He has an overview about his whole backlog, his sprint backlog, and of course the product manager or the product owner has his own backlog where he can add his new requirements. In our example with the kitchen, we have our owner of the restaurant, our chef, and the kitchen help. So let me check the time. I think we have still 30 minutes for your Q&A. So I will head back to the presentation, and you might ask or might want to ask some questions. Here is one question: if this presentation will be available or to download. Well, you can contact us and we can provide this presentation to you. So let me just mark it as answered. Here is another question: who you should contact to see a full Polarion presentation. Well, I would propose that you go on to our Polarion website and use the contact form to contact us, so we can give you a full presentation about Polarion to see all the other things which are important for you. Okay, here's a question regarding to Scrum, the V model, or if we are only supporting these kind of processes or if it's also possible to use different processes. Yes, Polarion supports multiple processes. You can have any methodology. For example, if you have Kanban, all of these are wiki pages, and they're completely configurable, so you can change and decide what kind of reports and what kind of specifications you want to have. There are different kind of regulations we support, and of course, Polarion templates deliver also some finished document templates, for example, which support you. Then there's a question if this presentation is recorded to a video. Yes, it is recorded. You will get it in an email after the webinar, so you can share it with your colleagues. Let me also check. There were some other questions which were sent to me. There is a question about traceability metrics, how you can see that from a specification point of view, and all of it is covered by some user stories. That would be an example for the traceability table, like I said. This is a wiki page that you see, okay, all requirements out of my specification are covered by user stories. That we will have a user story for each requirement. So our development team is only implementing, it's implementing everything, which is part of the specification. Then there's also the question how to do, for example, some modeling and integrations of modeling. You can use, for example, these diagrams to have some use case modeling, but of course there are also some different tools like an enterprise architect or, for example, some MATLAB, and Polarion delivers some integrations for these kind of tools. So you can check our extension portal, and you can see that you can connect different tools to Polarion, do the modeling in a different tool. Maybe you already have these kind of tools in your company, and you can take these models and import into Polarion, so they will be in the specifications at the end. Here I got some questions about the cost of Polarion software. That's also something you should contact us and talk about it with us, and because it depends on the things you want to use about Polarion software. Here is a question, if I understand it right, about an example of a template of a document. Let me check. I thought I showed this one. So I have taken this hybrid requirements, for example. I guess there were already some requirements in the specification. But of course, this could be an empty document without these requirements set up as a specification, and you have, for example, a special project for it where you can store all document templates, and you can reuse this template and put it into another project. So you can reuse this template and then start on specify these requirement specifications, because not all the time you want to start with an empty document. You want to take your document templates for this. Hopefully I answered it correctly. If I didn't answer your question at the end, or I did answer it wrong, you can also write me an email and I'll answer it. Okay, here's a question: if Polarion tracks resources which are consumed and the percentage of the work which is completed. Well, Polarion has, for example, let me go back into this e-library. Polarion has a life plan, which is some sort of resource planning. I think it's much easier to, or we will see much more if I open my default repository and there in my life plan, because we will have some much more information. And in there, we will see, okay, which user is working on which work items weren't assigned at all. So there is also some sort of resource planning, and to get an overview about the status of the project, this could be also wiki pages. Let me open, for example, this simple project, and there you will also see an overview about the percentage. Did we cover all our requirements by customer requirements and test cases? So this is also possible to have some charts to see the percentage of the work which is completed. All regarding on the attributes in Polarion, so the workflow, for example, or if some attributes were set to passed, failed, finished, or not finished, and so on. Maybe there's a question if it's possible to import specifications into Polarion out of Word or Excel, for example. There are also some importers for Word and Excel where you have some you can configure your automatic import rules to import these kind of specifications and then use them in Polarion. Here is a question: if you need to see a full demonstration to understand these reporting options. Well, with this kind of demo today was really short. We didn't show that much in Polarion. So you should check our other webinars, for example, to get a demonstration, and then you will get some more information about these reporting options. Or you contact us and ask us to do a demonstration for you and your company. Please get some questions about costs, and please ask them and go to our webpage and ask via the contact form to ask for some costs, because I'm in professional service. I don't know all these kind of information, what license costs and so on. And there are our sales guys which are much better for this one. And it's also, if you have some questions where you want to ask how to implement this, if you need some help about this, these are all kind of questions you should ask via the contact form. And we can give you a demonstration about the whole functionality about Polarion, or the functions you need, and we can give you some examples, and you can really send us your requirements in before, and we will do a demo specially for you, so you might get a better understanding about Polarion and how it works.
Hi, Daniel.
Okay.
It's Nancy. I also put, if anyone wants to sign up for a demo, certainly my email is in the chat line. Send me off a quick email, and myself and our business development team will be more than happy to arrange that for you at your convenience.
Okay, thanks. Last question, because I think we're nearly finished. I hear some question if Polarion is flexible to create, for example, more requirement types and layers. And yes, it's possible. If I go, for example, in this Drive Pilot project, we will see that we have different kind of requirements. We have the system requirement, software requirements, mechanical requirements, electrical requirements, and all these work items can have different workflows and different attributes. So you can really build up your V model and say, okay, at the first phase, at the top of the V model, I describe my system requirements. If I go deeper, I need to describe my software and mechanical requirements. So Polarion is really flexible to do this. So, but before we end, let's check the next steps. What you can do is you can, for example, as I said, let's go back to the previous slide. If I didn't answer one of your questions, you can send an email to me, or you can send an email to Nancy, who will also give it to the right person, like I will do. I will answer it directly or hand it to the guy who's responsible for you, and you will get an answer about all your questions. Next steps about Polarion would be, for example, you can download a 30-day free trial, so you can try it by yourself. Of course, you can check our extension template, download some templates and maybe some reports, and try them. You can also try it live if you don't want to install anything. You can access it via our live servers, where you can try everything. You don't just create a login and try it on our servers. You can also request a proof of concept, so we help you and we show you that everything you want to implement into Polarion is possible, or what's not possible. Or, of course, watch other demos. We do have lots of these webinars where you have, of course, different topics which will give you some information about Polarion and how it works. Last but not least, I want to thank you for your attention. I hope you liked it and you got some information would help you. Like we said, you can get the presentation and the recording and everything afterwards. If you want to have more information, please join us via some social media groups where you get notifications about new events, different webinars, different kind of information and new updates. So please stay tuned for our webinars, which have different topics. And of course, these topics might also be in other languages that you say, okay, I'm more familiar with German or with French. There are also some webinars in other languages. So thank you very much. I hope it helped you a lot, and you now have some more information about hybrid agile and how this can be done, for example, with Polarion, and of course what hybrid agile means. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.